So I watched a video on the population collapse in a lot of these developing countries or developed countries, such as South Korea, which is the worst. It's got the lowest uh, replacement rate of children being born per couple or per woman. And it's like less than one person. Or you got countries like Japan that's also less than one person. A lot of these other countries, in industrial countries, Europe, China, the United States, Australia, etc., have birth rates that are under replacement. In other words, they're having less than two children per couple or two children per woman, which means that you don't even replace the parents, over time. People do get older, they die, and then the children replace, and the next generation replaces them. So over time, your population decreases. Whereas even developing countries also have the same problem. They have, their population is down to like two children per couple, but you got to understand there's infant mortality. People do die at younger ages in these countries. So the population, the world population, is actually set to continue to rise in some areas, like in sub-Saharan Africa, to some degree in the Middle East. But at some point, it'll plateau and it'll actually start decreasing as what is going now continues to unfold in the next 100 years. And the recommendations of this so-called expert, the population expert, was saying that we needed government policies to change what is going on. And I've heard of arguments of, in Sweden they have more child care, which has increased the population a little bit. And maybe that's true. But you have to think, why is this a problem to begin with? I see people all the time talk about, well, they'd love to have children. I know I would, but why? What's the problem? Well, first of all, your wages haven't increased with regard to inflation. In other words, real wages, that is accounting for inflation, have actually decreased over the decades. You have the issue of debt, where people who are buying their first mortgage is more as a percentage of their income than it was generations ago. You have student debt, which is the case of some people. It's not the case of me because I paid all my stuff up front. Not that being educated had any bearing on my career anyway. And you have the issues of women being in the workforce, people working longer hours. And now, granted, people used to work longer hours a long time ago, and then the hours kind of decreased. But now you hear a lot of these people working 2-3 jobs, and women are working a lot of hours. People are glued to their phones. They're glued to this thing instead of actually going outside. So there's a lot of issues to touch up on. But I can tell you this, the government is not going to really significantly change the situation. They were also talking about immigration too. And if you have immigration to the extent that you would have to replace these populations, say in Europe, it's just that it's a replacement. So essentially it wouldn't be Europe anymore. It would be an extension, in this case, North Africa and the Middle East. You'd have a totally different culture, totally different norms. So these free and open societies would essentially become Islamic societies, in more than 100 years' time if this continues. So what's the solution? The solution is actually just the opposite. You need to get rid of the central bank. We need a hard currency. In other words, going back to the gold standard. We need a free market economy where technological development actually lowers the cost of living, because that's what that does. That's what computers do instead of having to pay people to file things away. The cost of computing has gotten cheaper. I mean, this is a handheld computer right here. And it does serve to lower the costs of doing anything, of keeping records, all that stuff. We need to have a rational discussion about people socializing. Instead of people being glued to their phones, people need to go out more. People need to actually talk and use good communication skills. Take a risk, take a chance. There's also the testosterone levels that have been dropping, and that has an effect on the way people socialize. So there's that too. Lower testosterone levels probably leads to a population decline as well. So the solution is, I know for me, is I go out, I take good care of myself, both financially, socially, physically, mentally, and I hopefully will lead an example for other people to follow. They say, okay, this is the way forward. This is how to live a better life. But I can tell you the government will not do any of these things. Our government okays, having microplastics everywhere. It's okay with glyphosates being sprayed on crops, which, by the way, lowers testosterone levels. It's okay with all these medications that wreck people's health instead of, you know, making so that that the medical industry looks at the root causes of illnesses, which, by the way, mostly is poor diet and poor exercise and stress. But we need to have an honest conversation about the fact that there's too much government, there's too much corruption, that it's created a situation where businesses profit off of sick people. It's made a situation where people don't interact with other people in the way that they would need to, in part because of the government, because of the way the economy is. So I totally disagree with the so-called expert. And I'll put a link in the description below of this video so you can watch the video. It's kind of an interesting video. But the solution is actually less government. And people need to learn how to think for themselves and think rationally, and how to live a more healthy existence.